Love this podcast? Support it and sponsor today. Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.
Why don't you write when you don't need money, honey? That would certainly make a hit.
Welcome back to Word Docs. I am your host, Dr. Alex Vickery Howe. I am here with Dr. Sean Williams. Whee! Dr. Amy Matthews.
Hello.
And special guest star, Dr. Jonny Zweck.
Howdy.
Feels like there should be like canned cheering there.
Yeah, like the World Wrestling Federation.
Yeah! It's good to have you on the show, Jonny. Jonny is Amy's partner, and they are both in quarantine together, obviously. So this is going to be an interrogation of Jonny with Amy next to him. So he's got to be careful what he says.
Not weird at all.
She is not scary at all, so it's she's 5'5".
I've spoken to many students who disagree. So I'm going to kick off by talking about the story that traumatized me because I have to get it off my chest. Jonny wrote a story called Sam in an anthology called Thrill Me that we all just happened to be in.
Thrill Me from Grimmer Pless, available right now, edited by Lynette Washington.
There's a link on our socials.
Did you say Grimmer Pless?
Grimmer Pless.
Grimmer than what?
Glimmer Press. However, Grimmer would have been more appropriate because I read this story. I actually had a glass of milk. I'm not even kidding. I had a glass of milk and I had some malt cookies. And I had my blanket on and I was like, I'm gonna read Jonny's short story before I go to bed. And I've had a nightmare since then because it is a story that taps into a particular childhood fear. How would you describe it, Jonny?
Well, it's about poo. The neat way of summing it up.
Are all your stories about poo, Jonny? Is this a common theme?
It's a motif.
Not all of them. It does come up a bit, though.
Or out of it.
Yeah.
I'm fascinated by it because I'm fascinated by the abject. It's not actually an area I go to. Although I did write a play once where they put a poo scene in, and I was mortified because the prop was so realistic. It viscerally disgusted me. But I'm fascinated with the abject because Stephen King, and I think this is in relation to Dreamcatcher, said we've been going to the bedroom for a long time. You know, the doorway to the bedroom's been open forever, for decades, but we still are reluctant to go to the bathroom. And I think that is very true in fiction. I mean, in real life, I would hope that we don't have a reluctance to go to the bathroom because that's how your horror story started.
I had a friend who, when he drank a lot, he used to get confused between the bedroom and the bathroom.
Oh,
That's a horror story.
I had a friend who had night horrors, those extreme nightmares, and he would sleepwalk. And he got all the way out through the door of his house. He opened the door in his sleep, and he found himself pissing in the bin on the street in the Adelaide Hills, middle of the night. Now, that's terrifying. But I am fascinated with this idea of the abject. So what is it that attracts you to that kind of horror?
Well, I think just in general, the reason I write horror probably stems from growing up in like a religious background and sort of dad was a minister and a missionary. So constantly surrounded by stories of good and evil. And then as I sort of turned away from that faith, that left a bit of a hole. And so you start looking for meaning elsewhere. And horror always brings you there because whether it's the abject bringing you to the bodily or whether it's the monster bringing you to the edge of humanity, it takes you to the edge of existence, and in doing that pits you against the sort of awe of the universe and your existence in that. So I think that's partly why I do it. It's also just like really fun and silly to write, and like what horrifies other people is often quite entertaining to write because you're like, oh my god, I've got his thumb in his eyeball, and you know, whereas everyone else is going, oh, he's got his thumb in his eyeball. I punched the ocular nerve, and everyone else is going, oh, the ocular nerve. You know,
picture me as your perfect audience member, you know, in a blanket with milk and cookies, and then you come out with that.
Yeah.
There's something. There is something rebellious about it, something naughty about it. I think
it's the punk rock of literature.
Yeah, it is kind of the punk rock of literature. Absolutely. And that line between the comedic and the horrific, because, I think a lot of that has to do with the body and with the disconnect between the mind and the body. And I've got a comedian friend who said comedy comes from the body betraying the mind. And I have a lecturer friend who had an attack of, what's a better word for diarrhea? I don't like saying diarrhea. I've said it twice now.
The squirts?
Yeah, that's not better. It's not better.
The Germans have a word for it, which is like Dachfall, and it's quite literally like poo-fall or whatever. It's
Also
like,
not better.
Oh, God.
Sounds like a video game.
Oh, wow.
Our subscription numbers are going to go down dramatically after this episode.
If they go up, we're going to be deeply concerned.
We'll be in the shit then.
But that idea of, a lecture being the epitome of, high art and intellectualism, and then your body betrays you. So there's something in, and that can be horrific as well as comedic. It's comedic if you're in the audience, but it's horrific if you're the one on the receiving end. And often I think we laugh out loud when we're terrified, right? So there's that link between the horrific and the comedic all the time. And it feels like that's the space you write in.
Yeah, well, I think that's, clearly like King is a huge influence on me, and he does that really, really well. There's always a sense of humour sort of floating around somewhere. So just going back to that thought you had, I think I've probably told you this story before. I went to a conference, and there was a comedy writer speaking at it. It was a television comedy writer, American guy. He'd written on some of these huge sitcoms, and he was talking about the difference between drama and comedy, and he said that drama tells us the stories of who we could be, and comedy tells us the story of who we are. And that I think that's why things like poo are quite funny, is that it's a reality that we all face, like the embarrassment of getting the squirts at a bad moment, or farting in an inappropriate place, and it's the same with, that's where slapstick is funny. It's like tripping over is it's embarrassing and therefore amusing.
I so want to tell a story here about Johnny's dad. He actually did that thing of wearing the microphone after a service while he went to the pub.
No, during the service. During the service. So it was like, it was a point where someone else in the service was doing a reading or something, and Dad just needed to duck out, and he's, the loo's just behind the church. Yeah, and the microphone's on, so the whole congregation's sitting there.
Oh, it's the worst nightmare.
Was he going, oh, Jesus, oh, God?
I think it was only onesies, so I think it wasn't too bad, but still.
Everyone else in the room's like, oh, I need to go.
Isn't it interesting, though, that the language we use around that, when you told that story, I went, that's my worst nightmare. So the language you use around that is the language of horror, which is kind of interesting. That's where you go. So I want to move on to a discussion about the kind of mechanics of writing. But before I do, two points I want to raise with you. One is to do with your writerly routine. We're obsessed with everyone's place of work and how you go about it. But I'm aware that you have, Amy does not have.
No, mine.
Lucy the writing cat.
Mine.
As your familiar.
I had Lucy for years before I met Johnny.
But so when I moved in with Amy, that sort of the cat and me, we started doing the thing. The thing is, I'm a bit of a cat whisperer.
He honestly thinks he could get into a cage with the lion and come out alive.
Yeah,
he's one of those idiots.
You've just got to go up and tickle its belly, and it's all good. So
that's against the law.
So what happened was, over the course of my first manuscript, I slowly trained her to sit with me while I was writing, and now all I've got to do is pull the chair out when I put the laptop open, and she jumps up.
It's actually worse than that. He's trained her so well that if the chair is tucked in and you're having dinner and she wants to sit with everyone, she will actually terrorise us until we pull a chair out for her to sit in. She will scratch the furniture. She'll just be a complete little shit until you get a chair for her to sit in.
She thinks she's people.
How did you train her? How did you train her to do that?
Just like putting blankets on things. She likes blankets.
But even we're standing here at his standing desk at the moment, and he can put the blanket up on the standing desk, and she will climb up furniture to get up there and hang out.
There's catnip in that blanket.
Yeah.
You can follow me on Instagram for
if you want to see the cat.
Or
me, because I also post pictures of my cat.
I think that the cat is secretly the one writing all of your books, like both of you. It's her work.
Yeah, she is. And that's it. Like, her paws just can't sign the name at the end, so it's fine.
You're stealing Lucy's work. God, that was almost Freudian, wasn't it? I'm stealing someone else's work. So the the other question I was going to ask you was, a successful day in your book is how many words, and how do you reward yourself?
I'm a bit of a plotter. So like Amy's got a thing about plotters and bingers, which she may or may not have spoken about.
I'm a binger. We are not compatible in that way.
So at like Amy's deadline, I'll hop into bed at like 11 or whatever, and she's sitting there, she's written, 8,000 words or something. And then I sort of start to fall asleep and I wake up at 2 a.m. and she's still sitting there madly typing away. Whereas for me, I'm much more effective if I just do a set sort of amount every day and leave myself ready to go the next day. Like, so, ideally, I'd love it when I hit 2,000, but 1,000's good. But when I get to the end of it and I know where I'm going in the next day's work, and leave it there and let it sort of brew overnight and go again. But yeah, the morning, get up, get it done. Because if you don't get it done, then other stuff gets in the way.
The day just crumbles around you. Before you know it, you're playing Major League Baseball and
on the PlayStation, and yeah, exactly.
On the PlayStation makes it much less cool too. If I just left it hanging, it was much more exciting.
If I was playing Major League Baseball, I probably wouldn't be writing.
And do you have a reward system? Because Sean's a chocoholic. I'm an alcoholic. Much more traditional. What's your, is it baseball? Is it
lunch.
Is it a pat with the cat? It's lunch.
Yeah. So get my words done, walk down to the shop, get some food, walk back home, cook it up, bit of bibimbap or sort of, a light
I'd like
spring
to point
pasta.
out, he doesn't cook for anyone else. He just cooks himself lunch.
If I offer you, don't eat it. So I stopped.
I think this should become a regular thing in our interviews. I think we have to have writers and their partners.
Yeah.
Oh, can we?
Yeah.
Can we please? That would be so interesting.
So, your background, well, you worked in advertising for a period of time. Mm-hmm. How did that affect the mechanics of what you do? And by that I mean, I've never worked in advertising in that way, but I guess there's a level of discipline, a level of brevity that would carry through to your other work.
Yeah. So in advertising, you learn that creativity is a job. So you rock up, you get a meeting, you get briefed. There are limitations on what you do. And you sit down and knuckle out the best idea you can in the time allotted and then pitch it. So yeah, it does that side of it. It also tightens you up because you have very small word limits. So a billboard's 5 to 13 words or something. A radio play, an ad, an average radio ad is 30 seconds. And then once you've done your 30-second ad, you have to do a 15-second cut down and sit down and read aloud. I mean, you know this from being a playwright, but sit down and read aloud for 30 seconds and see how many words you've got, and it's not many. And you've got to try and get in a whole little narrative that sells something and gives the requisite information. So yeah, it just makes you super efficient. And I definitely saw that after my time there, that my prose was much, much tighter. And I think you see it in a lot of writers who've come from non-fiction writing backgrounds. People who've been in journalism often. They're much more efficient with words.
Yeah, absolutely. So the other thing we wanted to talk about was grammar and punctuation. This is really kind of, Amy brought this to the table.
Well, I did, because it's like one of those things we have to teach all the time. And none of us, I don't know if you guys do, but I've not really met many writers who love grammar and punctuation and spelling. Like, it's kind of boring, but I'm one of those people, and this is why I thought of Jono's, because I can be a little bit mean about it, I guess. Like, when I don't write this on the students' stuff, on their drafts, but I have met writers who don't think writers need to learn grammar and punctuation and spelling, and that an editor will do that for you. And that makes my blood boil.
That just seems cruel.
Well, it's like being a plumber who can't plumb. But then that's where Jono's interesting, because he has a very different experience of this, and it actually made me lose that anger, I think.
And so what's your experience?
So I clearly have some sort of undiagnosed reading disability or learning disability or whatever it is. So from a very, very young age, my handwriting was just absolutely unreadable. When my spelling...
It still is, by the way, like a doctor.
Mine is too. Mine's terrible.
My early report cards were always like, everything would be in the top box except spelling, grammar and handwriting.
And I'm just going to interrupt here, because my son has the same thing, and he was told by a therapist that it's actually quite common in gifted boys and gifted creative boys, not so much in girls.
Dyslexia is really common in male actors, really common.
Yeah, right.
So you sort of grew up with that, and you grow up with people making fun of you for it, or not making fun, but making you feel shame about it. So my parents would, often they'll laugh if I make an error or something. Even as an adult. So I finished my first book. I haven't sold any yet, but I gave my dad the manuscript to have a read, and he showed up for a lunch after he'd read it, and he brought 2 pages of notes, most of which were corrections of typos or grammatical errors. So he'll do things like, dangling modifier. That is, whatever, and they're these things that they exist, but they in colloquial, conversational English, they're not that strict.
Yeah.
And English is a living language. And so I'm sort of caught both ways, because I think it's really important to be polished and professional, and I've worked very, very, very hard to clean my work up. I am much better now than I was 10 years ago, but that's taken going over and over and over things. But I have a thing where I won't see it. So if someone shows me the error, I can tell you what's wrong with it. I can fix it. I can do all of that. But if I read it, my eye just goes over it and doesn't notice it, which means it makes editing really, really difficult. And because for me, the number one thing when I'm writing is story and character, I think I make errors while I'm writing, and then the problem is I can't see them once I've made them because of that.
Yeah. I mean, that's good to know, actually, because as a teacher, I have a perhaps even a stricter level when it's an essay than I would if it was a creative work. With a creative work, I go, okay, there's a certain amount of license, but with an essay, I do get a little bit full on. And I often say to students, step away from it for a day, come back with fresh eyes, and you should be able to see it. But it's interesting to think that sometimes even when you've done that, you may not see it. You might gloss over it.
I can step away from it for 2 months and not see it. So I really think it's important, and I think this is why copy editors are amazing, and because they've got this skill that I just don't have. And I've got my friend, my buddy Rory, he can just perfectly write and edit things. They're just flawless.
What this brings to mind, sorry to interrupt, but as I was thinking about other forms of art, actually, like filmmaking or music, where you often don't have the artist doing this kind of editing.
No, that's true.
If you're talking about music, someone who's mastering it, and we were talking to Johnny's brother-in-law who actually does produce music. What's it called? Is it mastering?
Mastering's the end. Mixing's more what you're talking about.
No, but I was also thinking about the very end, and this is like our copy editors, right? You have someone who just concentrates on that, getting the final product perfect. You have someone who does have fresh eyes, and we do have that for publication because it is very hard to see your own work sometimes, and some of us on different levels. So some people are perfect at the copy stuff, but are no good at the structural work or the motivation for character. And it just made me, talking with Jono, made me think about all those levels, that there are probably things I'm not so good at with my work.
And so it's interesting, that professional thing. So in advertising, the idea is number one. The idea is everything. And so one of the best copywriters I worked with was terrible at spelling and grammar. Absolutely terrible. And within the creative department, so I'm in the literary scene, I get all these people having, sort of feeling superior when they read my work and making that known. But in the professional context, I was the best copy editor in the room. So I would clean up everyone's copy. And what I didn't understand is when I was in there, I felt like I was lifting other people up when I did that work, and I never once felt the need to belittle them for it. And I think it's really interesting how sanctimonious some academics and writers are.
Not me. At all, not me.
Alex and me, however, we're terrible.
I had a lecturer in undergrad he's a great lecturer. He's very entertaining. His area was poetry, and he was just brilliant, really old school. And I remember I was sitting on an HD going into the exam at the end, and of course, exam conditions, handwritten, my problems with spelling and grammar. I struggle in those situations, and he was pernicious about spelling and grammar.
I'm I'm also going to interrupt here to say he failed 55% of the class.
Wow.
And so my mark got dragged from an HD down to a credit because he thought that spelling and grammar was so important. It's like, well, how is that helpful? Like, how is it helpful to punish people that much if their ideas are good, or if like if their argument is good? Like, I think it's a really interesting combination of, yes, it's important to be polished and to work hard at that, but I don't think it's as important as a lot of people like to think it is.
Well, it's a balancing act, I suppose. I mean, you don't want to be someone that goes in there and goes, oh, someone else will deal with this because I can't be bothered.
Yeah.
That's very different to going, you know what, I'm going to give it my best shot. It's not going to be perfect, but there is someone else further down the line who can assist me with this. I often think that when people get obsessed with those details, and look, I can go there on my own work. When we're editing, I can get funny about things.
I will attest to that because Sean and I have had many texts lately where he's been editing a work where he quibbles over commas.
Quibbles over things. And I get it. But I also think if you're doing it to yourself, it's okay. But when you're doing it and not stepping back and looking at the bigger picture of someone's work, I think it's like you've missed the point of, I mean, it's like when a really famous singer comes to town, some major talent, and people go, oh, he or she was a bit pitchy on that one fabulous song that they wrote. And I always go, I think you missed the point of who they are, like, yes, in that concert, maybe one moment was not perfect, but they also wrote the fucking song. Look, I dropped an F-bomb. That's how passionately I believe in this.
It's a first.
Johnny broke him.
They actually made, they made their career, they made their persona. I always find it funny when people nitpick on those little things and you go, I think you need to step back and look at what's actually happening.
The other thing I think too about grammar and all of that stuff is that in Australia they stopped teaching it for a couple of generations. They're teaching it again now, like my kids have done it. But I know I didn't learn it, and for years and years I'd never had students who learnt proper grammar. And in fact, it's only when you go to learn a foreign language that you learn some of the rules.
Yes.
And so I used to say to my students, I learnt this from Eva Salas, who now writes as Eva Horning, actually. She said to us in honours that if you're reading a lot, you'll know this stuff instinctively. Like, don't be scared of it, because the words can put you off, right? If you start talking about the accusative or the dative, or you start using all those technical terms that terrify us all because we never learnt it, it can put you off, or it can feel like maths. I say to my student, for me, I'm no good at maths. Like, my brain reverses things similar to Johnny, but with numbers. And so the minute I start looking at kind of grammar, syntax stuff, I freak out. And my brain does the same thing. But I can do it. Like, I know it instinctively. So I think if you read a lot, like, Jono's sentences are fine. Like, mostly they're fine. But it is little glitchy typo punctuation things that you're just not seeing. So that's a copy editing issue rather than not knowing it.
And I think that's the thing. Like, for me, a potential reader wants story. Like that. Yeah. That's what they want. And if that's there... Mostly. But, like, I know very few people who buy a book because of its excellent grammar. Like, you know what I mean? Like,
But what about when someone deliberately plays with language? Because this is a source of frustration for me sometimes when working with editors, where you go, I actually did that deliberately. Technically you're not supposed to start a sentence with and. It's like a rule from primary school. You should never do it.
No, but we do it all the time.
Yeah.
Or sometimes you'll start a sentence, or, you'll deliberately do a fragmented sentence that I would not do in an essay or an academic article. But it's something to do with the pace of that moment. She reached for the gun, grabbed the man by the collar.
Drank the Moscato, full stop. Jumped, full stop. There are things you can do for pace reasons.
I had an editor a couple of books ago, and she was amazing, like meticulous. Like, so those copy editors are incredible. But she was so literal that she would pick up any time I was being poetic. You throw in a word, and she would give me, in a track changes on the side, a literal definition of the word and saying, not literally. And it's like, no, not literally, metaphorically. Like, if I'm talking about the sky looking like a still pond or whatever, it's not literally a pond. But she was, so kind of literal about everything.
It's context and communication, isn't it? I think it's okay to be stricter sometimes. Like, I take editing and publishing, and I rage against my students who don't listen to my grammatical advice, because this is a subject called editing and publishing. So they've got to at least try.
Yeah, absolutely.
But again, that comes back to Alex's point that it's attitude, right? It's not about flip you, I'm not going to do it.
Yeah.
It's about if this is an area you struggle with. Yeah, I think it does come back to attitude and entitlement.
I had a line in something where someone, it's a magical doll character who was being put back together and she was looking for her arm and she went, oh, at least my head's still attached, thank goodness for small mercies. And the editor wrote, why did you say thank goodness for small mercies? Because clearly that would be a big deal, wouldn't it, to have your head missing? And I'm like, where do I begin?
You cannot teach humour though, ever.
No, you can't teach humour. So, Johnny, you're an avid reader?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah, you are.
I am, yeah. I'd read every day.
What would I find on your bookshelf?
So there's a lot of King, a lot of Tom Wolfe.
Oh, yeah.
Wolf. Johnny can't say the word wolf. He says woof. And the kids and I keep trying to teach him how to say wolf.
You don't say golf.
No, golf. You say golf with the L.
Yeah, but
Wolf,
it's inconsistent.
golf. No, it's not. It's the same.
You don't
It's
say
exactly the same.
wolf.
So it's
you
not
say
even just reading things. He can't hear things either. Wolf, golf.
I think I'm with Johnny on this one. I've got to say, wolf, it's a W.
Wolf.
Wolf, golf,
No.
milk.
Woof. You don't say woof, though.
Wolf.
My dad had this with paddock and paddock. He'd always say paddock, and I'd say it's paddock. He said, "But no, that's like calling your dick a dock." You know, it's not. I don't even know what you're saying at this point.
Does he eat haddock?
Exactly like that.
Very disturbing.
What a rabbit hole we've gone down.
It's a dark, scary rabbit hole. I was going to ask you one more question around advice. I've been asking everybody, what's the best advice you've ever had? Or even more excitingly, what's the worst advice you've ever had?
Remembering I'm right here.
Jim Jeffries, the three most important words in the English language. I don't care. I think it sort of covers everything from punk rock's fuck off, don't tell me what to do, through to shrugging things off. So
Love it.
Excellent.
So,
what's next, Johnny? How are you going to top the poo story?
He can't possibly. Don't dare him to do that, Sean.
Have you ever heard of prolapse?
Stop. No. He's actually just finished a book. And now he's about to start another one.
It's great.
Is it disturbing?
Well, do you know what? I didn't think it was that disturbing, but people are disturbed.
Yeah.
Make me your ideal reader. Just imagine me smiling and see if you can take that smile away.
Everyone who's read the latest one, except Amy, is really disturbed by it.
My mother was really sad. He sent it to my mother, and she cried and cried.
Fantastic.
And she reads a lot, and she's quite tough. One time, she read one of my books, and she said it really nicely with a smile, but she said, "Do you think you're wasting your talent?"
Oh. You mean by writing what, darker stuff, or by writing
Romance, basically.
But she likes my book.
And on that slightly competitive and disturbing note, we are coming to the end, I believe, of another
The first of our writers and their spouses kind of series of interviews.
And we will get Amanda in next with Sean, because she writes history.
Oh, no, Amanda's far too busy.
see how that works? See how that works? I've got to go pick someone up, evidently, and just bring them in and go, I need someone for this podcast.
Or we could do writers and their exes. Exes in. That would be something.
That could be a whole other thing. Yes, that could be.
good grief.
Very disturbing. Lovely to talk to you, Johnny.
Thanks for having me.
Keep disturbing people.
Keep going to the toilet.
Yeah, no, definitely keep going to the toilet. I mean, that's just good advice for everybody. Keep up that high fiber diet. Lovely to see you, Amy. Lovely to see you, Sean.
Feeling is mutual.
See ya.
And to our lovely listeners.
We will do more on grammar sometime, I'm sure. We hate it.
Yes, if you struggle with grammar, no, you're not alone. If you struggle with the toilet, no, you're not alone. And we will see you.
You'll hear us.
On another episode of Word Docs. Happy writing.
Why don't you write when you don't need money? All your notes sound alike too much. All of them start with I love you, honey, but they end with the same old touch. Just for a change, send a nice loving letter and cut out that please remit. Why don't you write when you don't need money, honey? That would certainly make a hit.
Well, I just had to get down before.
Do you need it taller than that?
That's all right.
No, you do need it taller, don't you?
Right. You can hear me from about here. Is that?
No, you have to go in quite close.
All right, getting it.
You guys are like Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman, but backwards.
I'll get a box.
Except I am like Tom Cruise. Amy's just really, really short.
Love this podcast? Support it and sponsor today. Simply head to AuscastNetwork.com for details.